Hi, how you doing? So today I want to talk about a study that landed on my desk, muscle cramping in the marathon, dehydration and electrolyte depletion versus muscle damage. So muscle cramping, it's one of those subjects that brings out the voodoo in everyone. There's definitely a lot of gurus on the subject. There's definitely a lot of snake oil. And to be honest, it's really not well understood. So today I'm just going to read the study. Do I have an opinion about muscle cramping? Of course I do, but let's keep our inferences limited. So first things first, I want to define a few things. Today we are specifically talking about exercise-associated muscle cramps. They're often defined as painful, spasmodic, involuntary contractions of skeletal muscle during or immediately after physical exercise. Now, just to be absolutely clear from the outset here, we are talking about exercise associated or exercise induced cramping. We're not talking about nocturnal cramps. We're not talking about anything else that may have another pathology to it. We are very specifically looking at exercise cramping. Now, what did this study do? This was one of those cool studies that I really like, where they grabbed a whole bunch of people running a marathon. So they grabbed a bunch of Valencia marathon participants. They pulled them into the lab beforehand. And they did some baseline testing on them, obviously. These were by no means elite population. They were recreationally trained. We can see this here on table one. So the average age was about 40 years old. The average BMI was about 22. VO2 peak ranged between about 50 and 55 between men and women. So they were recreationally trained. So what they did was once they got that, they sent them downrange on the Valencia Marathon. After the race, they grabbed them and they did some follow-up on them. And here's where things obviously just get really interesting. So there was one paragraph in this whole study that really grabbed my attention. And it was there was no significant differences were found in hydration status variables pre-race and post-race between the crampers and the non-crampers in that cohort. There was no difference between the sodium and the potassium levels between the crampers and the non-crampers at the end of the study. Now, let's just scroll down a little bit further. What we can see here, when I get to the table I want, okay, we have crampers and non-crampers. Basically, they were pretty even in their experience. They were pretty even in their training volume and weekly training hours. So they were fairly homogenous. The big difference between crampers and non-crampers was crampers, only 25% of them had been partaking in strength training, whereas in the non-crampers, nearly 50% of them had been partaking in strength training. So you've heard me say this a million times before. Anyone who's followed my work for a while will say that strong people are harder to kill than weak people, and they're generally more useful as well. The study goes on to make a really good recommendation, and I think this can be inferred to a lot of modalities of exercise here. Okay. Their results suggest that strength training, rather than greater endurance or total training volume, could exert a protective effect against exercise-induced muscle cramps. So basically, like I said, strong people are generally more useful than weak people. So if you are suffering from cramping, instead of bunging an extra hour of zone 2 into your training, or instead of bunging an extra threshold session in or something like that, you are probably just better off getting in the squat rack and doing a bit more lifting. Just a general observation, and this is just an anecdotal subjective observation, is between runners and cyclists, most of the research always, or all the research always reports that strength training is beneficial. Is that because strength training is beneficial, or is it because endurance athletes are just painfully weak? In my 10 odd years as a strength and conditioning coach, I'd say the latter. I'd say most endurance athletes are, to be honest, to be brutally honest, they're just painfully weak. And any kind of strength training is going to be of benefit. Anyway, look, that's the study here. There is obviously quite a lot going on in muscle cramping that I won't go into in this video. I apologize for the slightly spastic webcam today. I've upgraded my microphone, as you can see, and my cam has decided to freak out. Like I always say, this content is not going to grow unless you guys help me grow it. So please do all the cliche things: like, rate, subscribe, comment, etc., etc. That's all I've got to say today, guys. Peace. See you later.